Any Given Team is the book by Ray McLean, and it sounds a bit cliche, but that's our honest belief that the same principles that applied to those sporting teams will indeed apply to corporate, to any team. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andrew Matner. In this episode of The Little Black Book, I'm joined by Daniel Healy, Adelaide-based partner and director of Leading Teams. Leading Teams provide organisations and their leaders with the necessary tools to create functional dynamics and high performance within teams in order to create a shared vision, goals, behaviours and expectations. In this episode you'll hear about how career and professional support created a foundation, the importance of having a support network to help you through business and personal crises, how to build trust within teams and to create a culture of high performance, how knowing your personal why provided a guiding light through difficult challenges, and the importance of owning your outcomes and taking responsibility for your own development and vision. Welcome to The Little Black Book, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs who provide their first-hand experiences to help others learn and grow. This podcast is brought to you by Altitude Advisory. Altitude Advisory is a modern business advisory firm helping business owners build a better business for a better life. Favourite movie of all time, mate?
Mine would be Shawshank Redemption. I imagine It's a pretty commonly answered. It's a ripper. More recently got my 3 daughters to convince them to sit down and watch it. And they perhaps weren't as convinced on it as what I was. But I love Shawshank.
Anything particular about the movie, mate?
Oh, maybe it's because I'm a sinful fella, but I didn't see the ending coming, and some of the messaging in it's pretty special as well. I reckon. Love Morgan Freeman. I reckon he's a ripper.
Yeah. No, there's definitely some themes through that movie that just that resilience to hang tough, and bit of the good defeating evil in the end as well. So
love it. Yeah, no, it works out just right in the end, doesn't it?
Cool. What about a book that as a young child or a young adult that had a real effect on you, and why?
Well, I could go with the primary school one, I remember, but I'll get a bit more serious in a minute. I used to go to the library for the old silent reading, and I wasn't a mad reader, and I love sports, so I would borrow the How to Play Australian Football book, the hardcover one. The one we had Michael Roach taking that hanger on the front of it, and so I'd borrow that every time, and I reckon I knew that inside out. But I got to high school, and again, it's a fairly it's not a very original one, but To Kill a Mockingbird was one I reckon we did in about year 10 English, and the role of Atticus as the lawyer and the father figure, and his want to do the right thing in a pretty ordinary time in the world, I guess, as far as the racial conflict in Southern America in whatever era that was that stuck with me. And that's and then obviously the movie's a ripper as well, with Gregory Peck playing Atticus. But it was one of the few books that I reckon I preferred to the movie. I'd read the book first, and so that was a pretty special one. Yeah,
cool. Thanks. Interesting. You spoke about the footy and the AFL book and Michael Roach. Growing up in the country, that was obviously a big thing. Sport and in terms of your upbringing and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure. Yeah,
I was mad. I had 4 sisters growing up, and I still give them a hard time to this day, because my memory is. And it's probably why I get stuck. Used to resent Dad a bit at times. I remember Sunday afternoons there'd be a VFL replay. It might be a grand final, it might just be the VFL game of the day, and I'd lose the battle with my sisters. They all wanted to watch an Elvis movie that was on, which had probably been on 50 times before, and I was trying to explain one's live, and come on. And so but I used to lose out. So I struggled in my house, but I was mad for. And they used to tease me because in winter time they'd ask me the question, what was my favourite sport, and I'd always say football, and then I'd say, they're not going to catch me this year. And then in summer they'd say, what's your favourite sport? And I'd say cricket every year, and they found that funny that I changed every season. And so that was the staple diet: cricket and footy, a bit of basketball in summer as well, and that's what you did in the country.
Yeah, cool. And you grew up on a farm, is that right?
It is. Well, we actually lived in a town called Hamley Bridge, about an hour north of Adelaide, and the town was out in a little place called Barabba, and we were only Dad and his brother had about 1,500 acres between them, and then that split when my uncle had some boys, so my cousins were older than me, and they wanted to have a crack at theirs. So then that meant our piece of the turf was pretty small, and so we had to do a lot of intensive stuff, lot fed cattle, and then pigs in the end, and that's hard work. And I guess like a lot, I decided, and Dad didn't put any pressure on me to get on the farm, and my sisters didn't either, and like a lot in that area, and I guess around all of Australia, we ended up getting, I guess, consumed by some of the bigger ones. I reckon around our area where there might have used to been 20 farmers, there'd probably be 5. That's just a guess, and I guess that's why country towns are struggling to keep sporting teams and stay alive. So we loved it, but we clearly weren't quite big enough to really be hugely successful, and I guess I'm really thankful to Dad that there was no, as much as I loved being involved, and I probably never really saw it as a career for me.
Yeah, okay, cool. Most transformational travel experience you ever had?
I've been lucky enough to go on a number of trips. My sister lives in Ireland, married an Irish fella, so I love going to Ireland. But when you say transformational, mate, I'd probably have to go to, and it was actually a work-related trip initially. I'm really lucky that I worked for a few years with Thomas Farms, Thomas Foods, a really strong brand in South Australia and successful business, and they have an arm of their business in America, and suggested I go over there and do some work with them, which was again one of my biggest highlights in my working life, and that was in New Jersey, but right on the border of Philadelphia. So I just remember one morning driving to work from Philadelphia across what I think was called the Benjamin Franklin Bridge to New Jersey to do work for a week, and that blew me away. What worked even better was, I'm a massive Bruce Springsteen fan, and he had at that time undertaken to perform on Broadway. So in a little theatre about, I think, 1,100 people. I'd seen him plenty of times in the big arenas, and it was a 2-hour just singing and talking. And so I decided on the Wednesday of the week that I was working there to get an Uber to a train station in Jersey and catch the train to Penn Station in New York, and then go and see Bruce on Broadway, knowing I had to get back the next morning at 8 o'clock for my next session. So the whole experience of catching that train, I got out of Penn Station and I was running late, and so I'm sprinting through the streets of New York. It's dark. It was autumn or winter. As it turns out, I ran past Madison Square Garden, I ran past Times Square, but had no recollection, and I've run in, and I just got in for the start of it. And then the concert itself, the presentation itself, it was emotional. I don't know if it was emotional because I was there. It was emotional because some of the content. I was pleased to hear since from a lot of men online that they've actually found themselves crying through it. But I bawled my eyes out through most of it. Mum had died recently. He talked about his mum in it, and it was just it cost me a lot of money. It was quite. It was an emotional night. The last bit was I got back to the train station and I had 3% left on my phone, and I had an Uber coming to pick me up, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I'm thinking, if this doesn't get here before my phone dies, I'm in big trouble here. So pleasingly it did, and he had a charger in his car, and we were all right, and I got back to work the next day. So it was a pretty special experience.
That's great, and it's amazing. A lot of people and a lot of our listeners, have travelled overseas and done things and had pretty cool experiences. But your story just shows that how much you remember an experience, not actually necessarily a thing. So you've just described just running past Madison Square Garden, which is an iconic place in New York and things like that. But you remember the experience of the Bruce Springsteen event as opposed to the actual things around it. Yeah,
I did go back another time, luckily for work, and I did go and watch it again, and this time it was summer and it was day, and I made sure I took them all in. But the next morning to the team, I actually asked them, have you ever watched Crocodile Dundee before? And most of them said yes, and I put a photo up of Mick Dundee trying to get through this traffic, because as I ran through the streets I was dodging trash and I was dodging people, and I felt like I was Mick trying to walk and make his way through New York City. They found the good of that one. So it was amazing, life-changing experience.
Well, it is the city that never sleeps.
And it sure is.
Cool. You had a successful career in AFL footy. You went on to be an SANFL coach and a development coach and manager down at Port Adelaide. So you're in this exciting system of AFL footy. What led you to, I guess, leave that and go out in a corporate world?
Well, in the spirit of honesty, we'll clarify that I didn't have a successful career in AFL footy. I was an okay footy player, but certainly my AFL career was less than successful. But that's okay. I certainly had fun.
You did kick 6 goals in one game. It's my recollection.
Yeah, we can. Have we got time to talk about that? No, we won't. Your question, yeah, it's a good one. And I talked about my love of football growing up. I then did a teaching degree, but all along, football was my passion. I remember leaving teaching because I wanted to be in full-time footy. Central Districts was a club I was involved with, the SANFL, and I really was passionate about staying with them once I finished playing. And I said to their CEO, I want a full-time job in footy. Is there something for me here? He didn't have anything, and that's when I went to Port as a development coach. And development coaching is a great job. You're basically working with the 18, 19-year-olds trying to get them in the AFL side. And if they make it, well, how good am I as a development coach? And if they don't make it, well, you blame the recruiters and say they got it wrong. So it's an all care, no responsibility. You have them in the house. You build great relationships with them. I'm still good friends with a number of them years later. But it is also a young man's job. And the downside to it is you're putting a big foam backpack on your back half the time while you're letting the players come and take hangers on your back. You're doing a lot of that physical stuff, and I guess I felt like I needed a new challenge, and I went to the club and said, is there some other role for me, a line coach or the like. I'd been and coached the SANFL in North Adelaide, and the other option was to go and do that again because I felt like there was some unfinished business there that didn't go as well as I would have hoped. But the club said, no, we want you in the role you're in now. I was then overlooked for a couple of roles. Gary Hocking took one and Tyson Edwards took another. Now they had a few hundred games ahead of me, and I'm not suggesting that was the only reason, but one of the challenges people like me with limited AFL experience have is you're always going to be up against the next retiree coming out. And so I had to reflect on whether I wanted to keep doing this, how valued was I, and what did I want to do, and that's when it just happened that I went over to Melbourne for a Coaches Association end-of-year dinner, and I ran into Ray McLean, who had founded Leading Teams, and I'd been involved with at a very early stage at Central Districts. We were the first client that Ray had. And Justin Peckett was there as well, who was an old St Kilda teammate, and he's a director at Leading Teams. And both of them sort of said, well, what about it? We got no one in Adelaide. What are you thinking? So that's where the conversation started, and really it reminded me that my passion, even through teaching and coaching, had always been around this team dynamic, around helping people improve, and so that's when I made the leap of faith and left footy.
Is there any, I suppose, connection, or is it just coincidental that you ran into Ray and Justin, former teammates, and obviously working with Ray originally at Central Districts when they were rolling out the Leading Teams framework? Is it a sliding door moment, if you like?
I might be stretching it. That was complete coincidence. I think I might have rang Justin, and said, "Look, I'm not sure what I'm doing, and I'm coming over." But I think running to Ray, and I remember Ray was 2 or 3 red wine bottles into the night, so it wasn't the time we could, but so that was perhaps more the sliding doors. But certainly I'd organised to catch up with Justin and see what he thought. I guess I'm just lucky that I had those connections and had that fallback, and perhaps had a bit of a view and a passion for what I wanted to do with myself.
Yeah, cool. Some of your learnings out of that, and I find the whole Leadings team model fascinating. I might get you to elaborate on that in a second, but the basic essence of it is about people in teams or individuals building relationships with one another so that they can communicate better, and then turn into basically a high performing team. What was it in terms of that connection that really resonated with you, first of all, probably as a young football player, but then also coming in and taking it through from a coaching framework and now into a corporate environment?
Yeah, it's a really simple, and perhaps again it speaks to my simplicity of my mind. It is a simple model, but I was 18 trying to make my way at Centrals, and we went on this camp, and this fella was there, and we got flogged and did lots of that physical stuff that often the camps do, but for those people tuning in who don't know their footy, we were at early 90s. Central Districts had been in the comp for 30 odd years and had won one final. We were a pretty ordinary footy club, and our coach Alan Stewart was a local, and he wanted to change it. And we'd always thrown money at big recruits, and we'd been a bit of a glamorous side, but we'd always been this side that would crumble under any sort of pressure, and he wanted to change that. So we're at this camp. It's my first senior pre-season, and this fella's asking us, what's the truth about you now? How would Port Adelaide, who were the benchmark back then, how would they describe you? And we said, front runners, soft, easy beats, unprofessional, yada yada. And he said, well, how do you want to be described? And clearly it was fairly different to that. And he said, well, what are you going to do? What do your behaviours look like? So it was an opportunity as an 18-year-old to hear that. So if you're telling me if I behave like that, if I have a crack here and I behave in the way that we've all agreed to, I'm going to be accepted and I'm going to be able to speak up and say, hey, things aren't right or this is working. That's a very different environment. And it had some warts on it early, don't get me wrong. And as it does in a lot of times, the idea that your ability and your credibility wasn't judged on how many games you'd played, how many women you'd pick up at a nightclub or how many best and fairest you'd won or how old you were. It was by the way you behaved. And it just resonated with me. It also resonated with me because we turned our club around and played in the grand final 2 years later. And I'm strongly of the opinion it was based on, we didn't change our game plan. We didn't change our personnel. In fact, we lost some good personnel because they weren't wanting to come on the ride with us. And that was where I got to see, wow, this is really powerful and in its simplicity, but it works. And you have to have leaders, who Alan Stewart, as our coach, was, and a board that backed him, who are dead set committed to this, and they make hard decisions. I guess what helped, though, you talk about sliding doors moment. I could have got drafted to any number of clubs. I get to St Kilda, and this Ray McLean fella is at St Kilda, and that's the first AFL club he's working with. And those who know their AFL background, I know that the Saints weren't exactly littered with success through history, let alone through that period. And so Stan Howes had brought him on. So I walk into an environment, I already understand the model. I go in, I say, I know I'm just going to have a crack here and I'll get respect to the group and we'll see what happens. Now, in the end, it proved I wasn't good enough as a footballer, but the behaviour, and we were able to turn that club around into a pretty successful side for a couple of years and a grand finalist again. So it was an easy sell for me then. It was like, I am passionate about this. And then fast forward to when I joined the business, when we're now doing 90% work in the corporate space. Ray has written a book, and any people out there who enjoy reading, Any Given Team is the book by Ray McLean. And it sounds a bit cliche, but that's our honest belief that the same principles that applied to those sporting teams will indeed apply to corporate, to any team. Yeah,
it's interesting. I've read that book. I've read it a couple of times, and you just mentioned that first camp, and I know he writes in the book about that first Central District camp, and he just described a few warts and all moments that there were some interesting challenges early on as that rolled out. So tell us then, from a leadership perspective, as you were in early on or with footy within this framework, how do you as leaders deal with that behaviour or so forth outside? Because I remember reading stories about we said we're going to go and do this, and then all of a sudden the boys are playing poker till 3 o'clock in the morning and drinking as much grog as they wanted to on a pre-season camp, as an example. How do you deal with that?
Well, to play that out a bit, because I guess that's what made me realise that this Ray McLean fella, this is different to the usual theoretical bullshit that gets thrown at you. And there'll be plenty of people out there listening. They were probably already rolling their eyes with cynicism around the value stuff because they've been through those values days where he asked us those questions, how we want to be seen. And we said professional, and we said all that. Little did we know that he'd already asked the coach, or the coach had said, should we bring grog? And Ray had said to him, is grog a problem? And the coach said, well, yeah, they like a drink. And Ray said, well, load up as much as you can. And the coach sort of looked at him, but that didn't make a lot of sense to the coach, but luckily we went away with it. So the question then got asked, after we've committed to this newfound professionalism, serious, we're going to be respected in the industry and in the comp. What are you doing about grog tonight? What are you doing about tonight? And the senior player said, Ray, we're professional. We've just told you we're professional. We'll be all right. We'll be in bed by 11 o'clock. And sure enough, 4 a.m. And I love a beer and I love a game of poker. So I was being inducted beautifully into what Centrals is all about. Not only do we not keep our word very well, we are an unprofessional rabble. And our assistant coach, Peter Jonas, was front and centre and all that as well. And he still to this day is mortified that he was. And 6 o'clock, Ray woke us up to do what he still says is the hardest thing he's ever made a group do. So we certainly got his payback. But so I guess it was a really quick awakening that we're either got to be serious about this or not. And I think Ray probably went away and had his reservations whether he was going to get anywhere. So what do you do in the corporate world or any team? Fundamental, you get buy-in from the key people in influential places. And we're better now 20 years on at vetting groups organisations before we work at them, because if the leader isn't serious about making those calls, often people want to say, yeah, I'm all for values and culture and these conversations, as long as our gun salesperson can be an exemption, or as long as the star player, or as long as, but we'll let them do that. And as soon as we start doing that, what we're saying is that is our culture, that's our behaviour, we accept that behaviour. why shouldn't the rest of us be able to do it? So it is about getting that weight of numbers and about getting the right people on board.
Yeah, and it's a bit like John Maxwell, leading author and speaker from the US, talks about one of his rules is the law of the lid. You can't ever get any better than what the cap you put on yourself, and I guess in the same way, if you've got team members that are only prepared to perform to there, you can't ever get any better than there.
Yeah. And especially when those team members are senior, influential people in the business. Yeah. People don't mind making calls and challenging behaviour of the, I guess if you do an org chart at the bottom of the rung, folks, it's when they have to, again, we talk to leaders as that the most important conversation they need to be having is challenging each other, with your crew at Hub 39 and at Altitude, the ability for you guys to have those robust conversations at the top level. If you're not having them there, then good luck with the rest of them.
Yeah, it just all has to flow all the way through.
That's right.
Yeah. Interesting, we talk about this corporate environment. You mentioned 90% of your work now is in the corporate world. We've heard a lot, you just mentioned Central, St Kilda. I want to circle back to St Kilda in a sec. But, we've heard about Sydney Swans and the Bloods culture out there, and we know a heap of, sporting teams, a lot of AFL teams, but others as well, have had this model in there. From you as a leader in this space and a teacher, how hard is it for you to get up and be motivated to be doing this in a corporate environment versus the hustle and bustle of a footy environment or a high intensity sport environment?
Without wanting to sound idealistic or cliche, not hard at all. I often get asked who are your preferred clients. In fact, the girl we had in commercial and marketing previous to who we've got now, she used to say to us, I want to help you pitch to the right clients. Who are your ideal clients? I said, Caroline, sorry, I'm not going to tell you because my ideal clients are people who want to get better. And again, it does sound cliche. I get so excited when I get a call from someone who's been referred to from another client that because they've seen a change and they've got challenges. And again, the other misnomer about our work is that you only work with broken teams. Again, we love the association I've got with you guys at Altitude and the rest of the crew at Hub 39. You're a really successful business, but you just committed to getting better. And the irony of our work is more often than not, that's who we work with. The ones who really need it, the reason they're in that position is because they don't get it. So it's a really easy transition. People ring and say, this is what we're noticing, this is what we're feeling. We could get better. We're not having those tough conversations. That would be a general theme of the call we get. Can you help? And in simple terms, when people say, what do you do? Well, we help people most people have got a values statement on a wall somewhere and they think that's their culture. And we say, well, with all due respect, that's what you want your culture to be. Your culture is going to be what we see and what we allow, what we accept. Our job is to help you bring those two closer together. And it's really exciting. There's no doubt there's some industries and some government, local government, is harder. It doesn't move as quickly. If you had a continuum between sport and at the other end, you'd probably go there. But I love the small to medium space when you've got the MD, you've got the owners with skin in the game in the room, and there's still some pretty good pretty dynamic movement. And even when you're working with some of the ones that are slower moving, it's to be able to gently nudge them and remind them that it doesn't have to be like it's always been. So, mate, easy, very easy, as long as you're seeing genuine buy-in and people wanting to get better and you're seeing change.
Cool. So how do you deal with that? And, you mentioned the word induction before and, you just said about values and behaviours and that's what you really stand for because, the behaviour, you walk past is the behaviour you accept. Yeah. How do you deal with that as a owner and director, and you've got business partners effectively in other states? Yep. How do you deal with that internally in your own team?
It's one of the things that when people come to our business, they love the authenticity. We just have a lady in my business unit started in Perth, and her observation is that you guys are legitimate. You're real. It's interesting, mate. Ray was on a plane once, Ray McLean, early days, and a lady, he got chatting this lady, and she was asking about it. He showed her a book and told her what to do, and then towards the end of the flight, she said, "So how's your team going?" And he realised. And at that stage, he was a team of one. Yeah. And he thought, well, that's fair call. How can I do this stuff? And then they asked me how my team's going. So Ray didn't necessarily get the crew going. We didn't necessarily grow a crew at leading teams, and we could probably be a lot bigger if Ray and Craig Grime, our other original owner, had a more corporate sense. But his drive around growth was around authenticity of the team. So we're really pleased that we actually run the same stuff internally. People wouldn't go out and run an exercise with a team unless it's happened to them before, for a couple of reasons. One is because we want to get better as a team, but two, because we want people to be able to experience what they're asking people that they do experience. And I love to be able to share with clients that we just had a review because things aren't going well, because this wasn't going well. We don't ever push that we're perfect. What we push is we have a model to help us continue to work through any challenges we have along the way. So that's one of the advantages of being in a team rather than being a sole trader, that not only do you get support and guidance around how well you do your work, you actually get to be authentic and real and get to do what you're expecting others to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just mentioned there, leading teams could potentially be a lot bigger. Ray and Craig are the majority owners Australia-wide of the organisation. Does that, I'm not saying, burn you, or does it challenge you a bit where obviously a slightly different generation or a younger generation corporate-wise to actually push this and drive it? How do you deal with the restraints that, of course, some bigger majority owners perhaps put around the framework?
I certainly wouldn't want it to sound like they've restricted our growth. It's just not been a big priority for them. They've had people come along, more corporate type, and say, you guys could have 100 facilitators now. And the reality is, yes, we could. Why we haven't and why we won't necessarily is because it'll dilute. We aspire to be world's best facilitators, and we know that there's a limitation to how. And we know that we also want to be a really strong team. We've asked them years ago, what's the size, what's the limit to how big we're going to get? And Craig's answer was, when I don't know all the partners' names anymore. Now he's getting a bit older and senile, we reckon, so we might be able to cut our team down. No, in all seriousness, as a group, we are always talking about growing, and there's not a suggestion that we aren't doing that. And we've had some really encouraging growth recently, but it's got to be at our pace. It's got to be ensuring that the quality of product that we're putting out there is still as good as ever, and that we can still stay as a strong unit internally as well. So they're the sort of criteria which is probably going to limit us from being a massive core, and that's not really where we want to be anyway.
Yeah, cool. I want to circle back to St Kilda. So you came out of Centrals, and you'd rolled this model out, or Ray had rolled this model out with Alan Stewart, and you start to have some success there. You've gone to St Kilda, and you're the same framework there. Do you sit back and do you draw any reasons or any parallels, perhaps why, in their own, field, if you like, why St Kilda perhaps didn't have the same level of success as what Centrals went on to have through that run of highly successful years?
Yeah, I do. That's a really easy question, and it's got to do with administration.
Right.
Look, Stan wasn't perfect, Stan Alves, but the administration right there only decided to cut him loose after, when he'd made some good headway. I don't think, and I don't know all the ins and outs, I don't think he was able. I think we had some big personalities in our side that I think Stan was perhaps wanting to challenge harder, and perhaps the committee were stopping him from doing that. Yeah. Some of you would probably be able to imagine some of who those personnel might have been back then in our side. So again, remember, the weighted numbers piece is a really strong one, and the board and the committee need to be on board with it. Once Stan left, it became a bit of a revolving door for a while, the coaching point. Yeah. So for me, this is one of the challenges with sporting teams. It was boards would say, come in, Ray, work with the leaders. I've even had it at some clubs, work with the leaders, but what about you coaches? No, we're right. It's like, okay. And I've worked with a footy team before that when I said, how about I do some work with the board? No, we're good. And then 3 years later, we find that there's $350,000 missing, so that they weren't quite as good as what they thought to be. So it's the ability for everyone to be able to hold a mirror up to themselves. Yeah. And even when we go to organisations and it's the CEO will say, work down there with those middle managers. We push back really hard these days, because generally all we do is spend time with those middle managers, and all they do is complain about the mob above them, right? Yeah. So it's absolute. The lesson is, this works, our stuff works, culture works, businesses work when the behaviours start at the top. Yeah,
and I think that's really great share in that respect. And not of being aware of the inner goings on at the respective clubs. Yeah. But I can imagine from what you've just said that there's a great deal of stability and buy-in from the top down at Centrals, and it probably started at the second level at St Kilda and could only go so far.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah.
So, mate, in terms of your own career, you've gone through some challenges. You've described your own AFL career as not that successful, but you've played some AFL footy with St Kilda. You were then delisted. You've then gone and tried out a couple of other clubs, and you nearly got picked up. And sliding door moments there as well through no fault of your own at Carlton, I think it was. Then you're at North Adelaide as a senior coach, and that, I'll say, ended in tears. It didn't end that well. What are some of these learning? Having I suppose gone down this path and being kicked in the guts a few times. What are some of your key learnings that you've taken out of those experiences, and how do you now bring them into your own professional career and into business?
Yeah, I guess they're two slightly different scenarios. The playing one, I felt like I could get in my Magna Elite that I had at the time and drive back to Adelaide after that with my head held high that I gave it a crack and wasn't good enough. So for me, the learning is there. And I used to get frustrated, players would complain about the coach, and I'd say, hang on, well, have you gone, like, I guess even then you feel like some of the values I had, maybe I already was aligned to the, leading, it was, have you gone and had the chat to them? There's 45 of us, there's one, so I certainly was, the learning I've taken is to take things into your own hand and it's your destiny. So I'm really comfortable with the playing one. I had a crack, wasn't good enough in a couple of areas. And then I got lucky, came home to a really exciting dynasty at Centrals, and on the flip side, the Saints were pretty ugly for a while. So it was actually an easier transition than what you might think. The coaching one, mate, was really hard. That was one of the hardest times of my life. In fact, I've had two really good weight loss regimes in my life. One was that one, and one was marriage separation. So doing what you do and actually go to an F45 would be a better option. But I was warned. It goes back to the same thing we just talked about. I was warned before I went to North Adelaide that there's some people in key roles that aren't necessarily the greatest operators culturally, and to be careful of them. In my head, I'd been a development coach, so I'd been watching the sample. Some of our players had played a different club. It was before Port had a reserves team. I was really clear on the lay of the land. I didn't need this job. They came after me. You go for an interview where you don't care and you just tell them how it is. This is what I'm going to do to fix you. You guys and this, and this. And a day later, I get this call and says, you've got this job. And my ego just said, I'll win enough games and I won't have to worry about the politics. So I probably learned more about politics than I did about football. I had a clear mandate to do what I wanted to do, and then when it wasn't going, and admittedly, second year we were poor, so there's no shying away from that. But what I originally got offered a 4-year deal that I ended up accepting 3 years, and after 2 and it wasn't even that piece, because in the end I was probably relieved because it was really knocking me around. It was when then they wouldn't answer any calls or didn't want to pay me out what they owed me, which was really, that was the hard bit. And again, it only validated what I'd been told about some of these people before I joined the club, which is really, so did I learn to be less, I mean, I'd probably still say I'm as trusting now as I was then, but I guess the learning is that is perhaps be a bit more thorough in what you do. Would I change it? The only thing I left there not really knowing if I could coach or not, because there was some really extenuating circumstances in that second year, and I would have liked to have another crack. Probably the most pleasing bit for me as a person, mate, and I guess staying true to your values was the other thing I learned, is that the day after I got the sack, when you get rejected like that, and especially in a little old world like Adelaide, your first thought is, oh, my name is mud. And so I had Neil Craig and Matt Primus ring within a day, both of them, just to say we wouldn't mind chatting, and just to let you know that you're not, that hasn't tarnished your name. And I didn't know Neil Craig at the time. I knew Matt, but I didn't know Neil. So that made you feel a whole lot better about the whole situation. Yeah. And in the end, the sliding doors meant that I went back to Port and spent 3 years again as a development coach after doing a year before that.
As learning, and I mean, I suppose this goes a little bit back to this, this leadership being all in. Is there any, particular reasons or whatever, you know, because you said, you know, you got a mandate, you're going to go and do this, you know, you've got this belief in this model. Is there any reflections that why perhaps that didn't work, or that you couldn't or weren't able to translate that, you know, further up the hierarchy at North Adelaide to get that buy-in perhaps?
Oh, the point was made to me before. I was never going to get it from. I said I want a leading teams type model to come in. This is what I want. And they said yeah, but they were never on board. But it was this. They wanted me as coach. Yeah. So, the other. I mean, I didn't coach. I could coach. I would do a lot things better. And if I, from a technical point of view, coaching. Second year we had a truckload of senior players who were all off the park, which didn't help us. But I certainly went against some of my beliefs and values in the first year with pressure from the club to get a couple of recruits in that were perhaps older than what I wanted. We had a really clear successful formula at Centrals, and that was get younger guys, not necessarily ex-AFL guys that where Sanford was going to be their AFL. It was going to be there. They were going up rather than the 28-year-old who wants to come and have a superannuation fund for themselves. And we went down that path, and we needed to recruit, and I got seduced by the idea that they'll be able to help us, and through injury and through a few other reasons that didn't work. The first year was really, we made the finals, and you know, we weren't far off winning the elimination, and I felt like we were, and the second year went ugly, but I was really excited about turning that around, getting some people fit and going again the next year. So it was a tough time.
No, you mentioned Hills the two things that have caused you significant weight loss, and you know, if it's okay, you know, we'll talk about, you know, your relationship breakdown with your wife. How did that impact you business wise, and your ability to stay focused, and how did you manage to get yourself up and go and facilitate sessions about leadership and culture and all these sort of things when, you know, I'm sure on the side things that, you know, are not going that great personally?
Yeah, it's a good one, mate. On one hand, it was the only thing that saved me. I remember walking out of a session. It was actually, I think it was with the Crows, and walking out of the session. And so when you're immersed and you're facilitating, that's why I love it so much. I was in, and that part of my world was gone. You walk out the door of the building of the organisation you're with, and then you just almost get smacked in the face. Oh shit! Now I've just remembered what I've got involved, and so there's a lot of guilt involved, obviously, with the marriage piece. Credibility, you know, can I go and talk about some of this stuff when there's a marriage breakdown? Certainly when I was responsible for that happening as well. Again, you talk about team, where I'm lucky where I had support from my team to say, you know, we don't subscribe that we're all perfect. We talk about a model of So I had some really strong support. I was really fearful of telling some of my colleagues around, you know, what had gone on. But again, to this day, I'm really lucky that I've got some really strong support there. A really strong relationship with my kids, which helped as well, and I've focused strongly on them. At that stage, we were really going through some growth at leading teams, and I guess I accepted I could pull back from that a little bit and just focus on me. But there's no doubt there was some really tough times. But ironically, the actual in the moment facilitation was a saviour, if you like, and I'd like to think that wasn't impacted the quality of my facilitation by it, but certainly the other however many hours a day were a challenge. Yeah,
I know, having done some work with you guys for a while, you know, one of the key things that you talk about is, you know, genuine conversations, and I'm sure there was a lot of genuine conversations around that, and you know, through the footy stuff and other bits and pieces as well. But you know, for those listeners that don't necessarily understand what a genuine conversation is, do you want to share with us what that means?
Yeah. There wouldn't be too many groups we don't go and talk to, and when we ask them, what do you want to get out of this? I want to be able to manage conflict better. I want to be able to have the tough conversations better. I want to be able to be more courageous in my conversation. So I think in context, everyone gets the bottom of our model after we've talked about relationships and having agreed framework of values or behaviours. Sits underneath that is this genuine. It underpins the whole model, genuine conversations. And I always ask people, what do you think, or what do you imagine when you hear that? And most people get to, where you have to challenge someone's performance or behaviour. I said, yeah, great. But then I say, why do we call it genuine? You call it tough. I've heard courageous, all these other words. And we end up getting to the point for a couple of reasons. And one is that it's in the self-talk bit. If Andrew, if I know that I've got to have and I'm calling it a tough conversation with you, there's every chance I'm going to keep putting it off because I've just told myself it's going to be tough. So it's actually in the self-talk bit. Genuine also implies that it's a two-way. It's got some respect and some trust in the piece as well. And the other reason, what we mean when we say this genuine conversation, the other bit that not everyone remembers is a genuine conversation is also to be able to reward people's behaviour. So for us, it's about rewarding and challenging behaviour. And I can tell you, our experience is, as much as people think they do it, there's not as much of the rewarding of behaviour goes on as what there could be. And I reckon, in a lot of times, especially with us fellas, I reckon, we often throw sarcasm and humour in that. And the reason we do it is because it gets uncomfortable, because we're not used to doing it. And so the only way to get more comfortable is, of course, to practice it. And I love when I finish first days with a lot of teams, and one of the things they'll say is, my commitment is to have more genuine conversations with people. And I always say, God bless you for your intent, but you won't unless you work on your relationship first. Or can I flip that around? If you try to, and you haven't worked on that relationship, it'll be how it's received as well. So we're really strong with clients around changing the language from tough and courageous to genuine. I was so pleased the other day. I had a long-term client. We were talking about genuine conversations, and the MD said, we actually don't call them genuine conversations anymore. We're just up to we just call them conversations now. So it goes from this changing the adjective to genuine, but then once people get used to it, we're just having a conversation. It's worth noting that one of the things we challenge the language on is when people talk about giving negative and positive feedback. When we chat through this with a group, we always ask them, if you and I, Andrew, have got trust and respect in our relationship, and you challenge me on something, I always ask groups, well, why do you think he's done it? And they always come up with, because he cares for you and wants to get better. And I say, spot on. So how can that ever be negative? Yeah, good. So the notion that it's negative or positive, no, it's just feedback. You're rewarding someone, you're challenging someone. We understand at times it can be delivered poorly, and that's a different story. But if we have a trusting relationship and you give me feedback, we know that's a positive. So just changing people's mindset, because as soon as they hear constructive criticism, negative feedback, fierce conversation, there's an avoidance, there's a paranoia, there's a resistance, there's a defense mechanism. So it is about building the relationship. It's also about changing the mentality that these conversations are designed for no other reason to help us get better.
I think that's an excellent point. And your observation there that as leaders, it's really important just to change your framing around those conversations. It makes not just a difference for yourself, but it makes a difference for the person who you're communicating with,
and people further down the chain. And it becomes, we have a culture. You're able to proudly say at your place, we have a culture of feedback. We have conversations, and they see it. People walk into it and say, wow, these guys communicate it. It's like I always push back to the notion of anonymous surveys. Now, I know a lot of businesses do pulse checks, and I think they're a great way to get a quick snapshot, but we're always up for the conversation piece. So the anonymous survey, because people want to do it, let's do it anonymously because we know they'll be honest then. All we're doing is just continuing to perpetuate this idea that we don't trust each other and we have to do it anonymously. And I know for some groups that's where they need to start, but if we're working with them, we would challenge them over time that we just have conversations. We put names on stuff, we have face-to-face rather than have to do it anonymously.
Yeah, cool. I think the other point that you made in there as well, you talk about the negative and the positive, just being feedback. But the other thing is about, and I think men are generally worse at doing it than what females are. It's just the rewarding, the acknowledging the good behaviour as much as what you're calling out the bad behaviour. And I know there, my business partner, Kristen, she is exceptional at this. She is very good. The handwritten notes, the acknowledgement of, you've done a great job. Get around them, support them, all that sort of stuff. The things that you instinctively coming out of a sport environment, you see that and teams when they're going well, when you kick a goal and their teammates get around them and they pat them on the back and there's high fives and there's a bit of atmosphere around it relative to the ones that kick a goal and there's nothing. You already know they're travelling not so well.
And there's a couple of bits on that. One is the pushback from some will be, we're just going to reward people for doing their job, and my pushback to them is, why not? There's plenty of people out there that don't do their job. Why wouldn't we reward the ones? So we got to be careful. We're not talking about rewarding mediocrity. You're not giving people a pat on the back just because they turned up to work. It's about rewarding performance. When we leave day one with groups and they've created their new values, or they've realigned themselves to a values structure that was sitting in dust, getting dust in a top drawer or something, and so they've got this framework to go away with, I always encourage them to go and find people doing it. There's a danger when you leave that first day, oh, good, I'm going to be the police man or woman now. I'm going to find us people when we're not. No. The idea would be model it first, go away and live those behaviours, but then reward others. Because if you're rewarding people, there's a fair chance they're going to keep doing it. Yes, absolutely do the challenging, but the challenging becomes easier if there has been a few rewards along the way. Yep. So your point is right, and you're right. Fast-paced, high achievers will often think, well, I don't need to reward that because I don't need rewards myself. So and let's just keep moving. But there wouldn't be too many teams we work with where they don't sit there and say, we don't celebrate success enough, we don't reward, and it's probably because they're really successful and all they do is go on to the next challenge. But that's a pivotal piece for a lot of people, I reckon.
You started this leading teams arm, if you like, in South Australia with basically 0 clients, and you're a one-man show, and then you've grown it. We've seen different economic challenges. We've just been through COVID, and I'm sure some corporates or businesses out there would see some of the stuff that you do as a discretionary spend, not a really important fundamental spend in their business. Talk to us about some of the challenges you faced, either through that real startup stage or through COVID or whatever, and how you as a business owner have overcome these things.
Yeah, I guess I'd preface it all by saying how lucky I feel that I didn't have to go through anything like what Ray, the person who had started the model 28 years ago, did. One of the things that attracted to me, I already knew it, but the people that come into us that don't know, the attraction is there's a brand. Whilst we want to get it to be known by more, the people who do know of us know it's a strong brand. There's a product. There's a heap of models. So I'm lucky that I walked into something. So I've got a lot easier. Ray talks about early days. His resistance. He was a school teacher and he promised himself he wouldn't go and do relief teaching, even though that would have helped pay the bills. He talks about feeding the kids sausages and mash every night, but he knew while he was relief teaching he wasn't out finding this business. So when I left footy to do this, you're right, they said go for it. There's SA, we'll pay you X amount, which was significantly less than what I was getting paid, so we had to borrow money off the in-laws to keep the mortgage going. But they didn't give me any clients, as you say. And now SA had a bit of experience through the Crows. Ray had worked with them in Neil Craig's days, and so there was a few people I could chase up there. Other than that, it was just write down a list of people you know and get out there and tell your story. Now, for me, it was an easy story to tell because I loved this, I believed in it, and it was not like I was trying to flog some Amway off to them. I actually thought that I could help them. But the other bit is, similar to Ray, I had to put food, necessity is the mother of all invention, if you like. That drove me. Plus leaving a session on day one with the team and feeling such a buzz that I'd been able to help them. So I need to find more of them because I'm enjoying this work. I mean, very lucky. And I found this later in life, to be honest. I didn't know this at the time, but there's a book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. Some of your listeners would be aware of it. And there's a Venn diagram in it. What I can be world's best at, what I'm passionate about, and what drives my economic drivers, and there's a sweet spot in the middle. Yeah. And I've been really lucky enough, and I didn't read that book before I started, but that's what's happened with me. I feel like I'm reasonable at a job, and I'm certainly passionate about it, and it's been something over time, as much as it was challenging early, to be able to. So I feel really lucky with that. And you talk about those early days. The challenge in Adelaide was, and Adelaide people are naturally conservative, oh yeah, what other work have you done here? Well, I haven't done much here because I'm just starting here, but this is what we've done over the border. Yeah, but what about here? So you were really having to get them to do tasters rather than really commit to full-on 2-year programs, which is what we do now. So I was lucky. I had a lot of really good contacts, and you guys were some of the people that supported me earlier, and I'm forever grateful for that. It's a lot easier now. You talk about the discretionary spending. We are finding, obviously COVID being a bit of an exception, that people now are prepared to put culture as a line item on their budget, rather than perhaps when I started, or even certainly when Ray started, it was a bit of a gimmick. Let's roll out a day of team building. We still get a lot of calls in October and said, have you got a date in December? We want to do a team building day before Christmas, and we sort of respectfully give them a name of a paintballer or a 10-pin bowling, because we figure that's going to be as good as what they really after. So you're right. COVID challenges that notion, but it was bizarre. I was really proud. We worked hard during COVID. When we came out, the amount of new clients we had, whether people were able to sit there and reflect during COVID and say, you know what, culture is more important than ever. But we bounced back really strongly, and we're really, really proud of that. And so there's 3 of us in SA now. We've just put Jenny on in Perth. We managed to put her on, and she's had 2 weeks of work, and we still haven't met her yet, because when the interviews are on, we were in lockdown, and when she was due to come over here and meet us for the first week in February, she was in lockdown. So fingers crossed we get to meet her this week. But and we plan to continue to grow Adelaide and Perth in my little neck of the woods business unit. And with the view, again, it's not necessarily monetary based. It's trying to help as many people as we can improve their team performance.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just mentioned the lockdowns then, and we've all seen it. We've seen the debacle that rolled out with extensive lockdowns in Victoria for a long period of time, and we all know what's been going on overseas. And you mentioned about culture and how to gel these things together. How does this, or how is it going to work in this new way of doing things going forward when you've got somebody you've just employed a few weeks ago and you still haven't met them face to face? How do you work through that sort of stuff?
It's a good one, and I would always push it back to teams that nothing could ever take the place of face to face, and we found that trying to facilitate. But we're a national team at leading teams, and when clients of ours want to push back and say, I don't know Andrew that well because he's in Queensland and I'm in SA, we respectfully say that's bollocks. There is a phone now. There is even better technology than that. We always come back to this time versus priority ideas. How much are you willing to prioritise the relationship? I can tell you that Jenny, our new member in Perth, hasn't met any of us. I can tell you she actually put an article on LinkedIn, and it's a really good read. Her first few weeks at leading teams, she feels very much part of the team, and she hasn't met any of them. So it can make it more challenging. You talked about Kristen, you were offsider before. I know she, during lockdown, used to do FaceTime walks with her team at lunch because that was her way. She wanted to get out and exercise. She wanted to show her team that it's okay to get off your desk and exercise, but she also wanted to connect with them. If people want to, they'll find really easy and creative ways to connect with their team, but it's that priority piece. Yeah,
that's really good. Thanks, mate. What's your life motto?
So, again, one of the things we get to do, and we're just doing that Emerging Leaders program with your crew at Altitude and Hub 39, and one of the things they'll explore during that time is, first of all, who are they now? So they'll do some disc profiling, they'll get some feedback from some people, and they'll do some self-reflection. And why do they do that? Because it allows them to put the lens on themselves, but more importantly, then ask the question, similar to what Ray did to us at Centrals all these years ago, who do I want to be? If you want to be really morbid about it, we often get them to close their eyes and think about their funeral and a family member, a child, a friend speaking about them. What do they want them to say? And so we call that we create a personal trademark, a why. And mine is that I make a difference now, and then I've got some words that sit underneath that as to how I do that. And that probably sounds pretty cliche, but it's certainly something when I started leading teams and I started reflecting on, what do I want my trademark to be? I was doing a journal at the time, and when I'd come out of sessions, I was trying to gather evidence that I'd made the right decision, to be honest, because it was scary there for a while. But anytime I got this feedback, I just kept coming, and at the bottom of page after page, I kept writing, I'm making a difference here, and I realised that was who I was, and I certainly didn't think this at the time, but I reflect back on my upbringing. Mum and dad, we were a strong Christian family, but mum, they were always givers. Mum was always bringing people into the fold. She was supporting neighbours, she was helping them. I remember in a small country town, I'd be the one that would umpire the footy games, round up a group of kids because I didn't have any brothers, so I had to round some people up to kick the footy with. I then went into teaching and coaching, and I look at all that, and I guess I was always destined to do this piece where I was trying to help people. And so this idea that I make a difference is why I still go back to my old footy club and help them try and survive. It's why when people ring me and say, can you help us through this, I don't ask myself, and that's the beauty of a purpose or a trademark, I don't ask myself, I'm going to make money out of that, or what's right or wrong. I say, can I make a difference? And if the answer is yes, then I'm sort of compelled to say, yes, I'll have a go.
Yeah. No, it's a great share. Do you have a mentor?
I don't have a mentor. I guess one of the benefits, certainly Ray and Craig along the journey as our leaders at leading teams have been, but it wouldn't be someone I'd check into regularly. But one of the benefits of leading teams, again, is you've got 15 to 20 people who are all pretty much, we believe, experts in this space. So I'd like to think I've got 15 to 20 mentors, to be honest. So the connection we have, the way we challenge each other around both personally and professionally is I think we're pretty unique and pretty special.
Cool. Thank you, mate. Thanks for joining us. It's been fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, mate. Hi, I'm Daniel Healy, SA Director at Leading Teams. Thanks for joining us on the Little Black Book.